Hey Tigers, Tony here. I'm back in the studio after I cleaned it up. And welcome to my channel, Smart Tigers. I can't find my glasses today, but today we're going to cover some really interesting topics. I'm going to continue the program management framework, but today we're going to go over some actual tools you can use. I'm going to start by talking about how to find out who's who in the zoo. Then we'll cover RACI, and then finally we'll go over an example of how to use a RACI. Thank you, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright Tigers, I found my glasses, so let's go over who's who in the zoo. And this is very important because as a program manager, you have to make sure you really understand the people you're working with and their roles and their goals. We always start off with the customer in the center, whatever model we're using. Not only can you use this to understand the roles at your company, but you can also use this to really understand the roles of any customers you might be working with. First, there's leadership, right? Program managers need to make sure they give updates to leadership on a regular basis. And not only updates, but this gives you the opportunity to request any type of assistance you might need if you have a blocker. And another thing I use management for is setting up conversations to set up V-teams between teams. What I like to do is ask my manager, does he or she know the manager of this other team that I want to work with? I call that bridging. Now sellers, you might be surprised, program managers do work with sellers. Sellers are a great resource if you ever want to get customer feedback. And oftentimes, they'll have questions from a customer and even sometimes ask you to demo the product or service that you own. Then there's operations. Operations is probably going to be one of your best friends because whatever service or product you have to have someone run it, and that's operations. You might be surprised, but program managers work with the finance department. A good example is if your product or service requires lots of CapEx, you have to make sure that the funds are there to buy those capital goods. Now legal, that doesn't happen too often, but a lot of times you're releasing a new product or service and there's compliance laws, especially if you're releasing it in other countries. You want to make sure that you know your legal contact at your company. Marketing's a great resource for if you want to understand the communication of your product or service. And they'll tell you lots of things like the value prop of what you're doing and how it will be sold. And then finally, product managers. Product managers and program managers should work very closely together because when they hand off a product or service that you're going to manage, you really need to understand the competitive overview, the value proposition, and really how it's going to be delivered to the customer, and if there's any type of monetization and vision for the product going forward, and obviously an expected release date. All right, let's talk about a RACI. So what is a RACI? A RACI is a matrix. It has a list of all the stakeholders and what they're responsible to do in the project. It also indicates their level of involvement for each one of those tasks. Now, their level of involvement is indicated by a letter. R standing for they're responsible, A, they're accountable, C, they're consulted, or I, they're just informed on what's going on. So let's talk about the responsible person. This is the worker. This is the tiger who gets the thing done. They complete the task. Then you have someone who's accountable. They're more of a team leader. A lot of times in programs, I would be accountable for many of the tasks. Now, the hard thing to do is you need to go by this rule as much as possible. Every task could only have one person or one team accountable and no more. Or there is this huge diffusion of responsibility and it's tough to get things done. There's a consultant. So these are people possibly in other teams, like operations for example, and you really want their input and feedback because when you hand it off to that operations team, for example, it's going to affect the work they have to do in the future. And then finally, informed. Typically, this is a sponsor of the program, maybe your manager, and you're just keeping them up to date on progress and decisions made about the project going forward. Now, RACIs can be simple or they can be complex. Don't get caught too much into this. It is real easy to create a really complex RACI that actually becomes useless. All right, let's talk about how do I use a RACI. First, I use a RACI to get a project started, especially if I don't know the team. This is a great way to understand what people's skill sets are and who's going to do what. It's a tool for getting everyone aligned, right? If they're not sure, if people are a little hesitant, for example, to do stuff, this really aligns everybody and gets them on the same page. Now, if there's a conflict of who does what, this RACI should resolve it. Now, very important thing RACIs do is they really identify if someone on the team is not getting what they need to be done and why. Because if you need something 5 days from now and you wait 5 days to figure out if that person really knew that what they had to do, it's too late. Now, it also gives the program manager an understanding of the type of people that are on the team and that they're working with. I can tell you from experience. If you are having a hell of a time getting people to agree on a RACI, typically it could be like one or two individuals. You're probably going to have a struggle throughout the program, and that's something that should be addressed. Okay, Tigers, now we're going to create an example, and we're going to use this example throughout the course. It is very simplistic, I know, but I think it brings home the point for all the tools and concepts that I'm going to talk about. This is a fictitious example, and what we're doing is we're going to program manage a product and service called Tiger Coffee Machines. It's a new type of commercial coffee stand. What happens is customers walk up to a coffee machine. The virtual barista uses AI and facial recognition to streamline the ordering. All right? Pretty simple, but that's what we're going to use for the rest of the course. All right, now let's use this in our RACI example. So whenever you create a RACI and when you're starting to mark down the matrix of who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, always make sure that you have the definitions where people can look at it throughout the process. Don't just present what it is and think everybody's on the same page. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get agreement on who's responsible. All right. And in this example, the product manager, Sally Smith, she's responsible for most of the tasks. That's why she has an R by all these tasks. Then we're going to talk about who's accountable. And in this example, it's a single person, as you can see, and I'm being accountable since I'm pretty much the program manager and I kind of own the product and service for this. Then we're going to talk about who should be consulted and who should be informed. Something I'm going to point out here is if you notice that a person can be consulted and informed, right? They can have two roles going forward. So keep that in mind. And the most important thing is when you have a RACI, when you're all done, get sign off. Get sign off in email. Something that says, everybody agrees to who does what. All right, let's recap on everything we've covered so far. First thing we did is we covered who's who in the zoo. This was to give an idea of working with different people and understanding their roles. And you should really kind of make sure that you really understand how these people can help you and the services that they could give you or the services they need from you in your program. Then we covered a RACI, which is a responsibility assignment matrix, and we saw how different stakeholders on our project and their level of involvement for each task. We assigned them a letter, RACI or I, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, for each role that they were involved in. Remember, somebody can have two. They might only have one as accountable, but they could have responsible and consulted. And we created this fictitious program called the Tiger Coffee Machine, a program to show how we implemented the RACI with collaborating with other people or groups. So, what are we going to cover next? We're going to cover one of my favorite tools called the VSEM. We're going to go over an example using our Tiger Coffee Machine on how to use a VSEM. I'm going to talk about value proposition. And then we'll go over a tool that I use often called stakeholder analysis, and we'll do a quick example of that.